Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know how sometimes you want to get your head around a really significant book, understand its core ideas and, well, why it still matters, without spending weeks buried in it? Well, that's exactly what we're doing today. We're plunging into Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, that unsettling vision of the future from way back in 1932.
Right, and pulling out the insights that still resonate like crazy today.
Exactly.
Think of this as your express ticket to understanding the enduring power of Brave New World. We've gathered a pretty fascinating array of perspectives to help us.
Yeah. What do we got?
Well, everything from a review pondering its sort of spiritual warnings to Huxley himself reflecting on his creation in a 1958 interview.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Plus a teacher's guide to help us pinpoint the key discussion points, the ever-reliable Wikipedia entry, some vivid excerpts from the audiobook to bring it to life.
Nice.
And even some analysis from Lit Charts and PubMed, not to mention a lively online debate sparked by a modern reader.
Okay, quite a mix then. So our mission today is pretty straightforward, right? We want to unpack the nuts and bolts of Huxley's world state.
How they engineered this so-called utopia of stability and happiness.
Yeah, and what challenged that system, from within and without, and those big, hairy questions about freedom, individuality, and the very definition of happiness that the book just throws in our faces.
And we promise no information overload that'll leave you needing a dose of soma yourself.
Let's hope not. So let's dive straight into the heart of this world. Where and when are we exactly?
Right. Forget the Gregorian calendar for a moment. We're in London, but it's AF 632.
AF.
After Ford, 632.
Yeah.
Which translates to a far-off 2540 for those of us still clinging to AD.
After Ford, as in Henry Ford.
The very same, the father of the assembly line. In this world, he's practically a deity.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. They revere him. They say our Ford instead of our Lord. And even the Christian cross has been, well, repurposed into a T in his honor.
Wow. Okay. What's the big takeaway there for you?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Huxley essentially posits Fordism, this idea of mass production, uniformity, predictability, relentless consumption, not just as an economic system,
Right.
but as the very foundation of their society, almost a secular religion. It's a total paradigm shift, Efficiency and stability trump everything else. Traditional values, individual expression, gone.
And underpinning this whole system is this incredibly rigid social ladder. A caste system based on intelligence.
That's right. You've got your alphas at the top, the thinkers, the leaders.
The smart ones.
Yep. Then betas, gammas, deltas, and right at the bottom, the epsilons, who are basically, well, designed for manual labor.
And here's where it gets really, really creepy. Embryos are environmentally engineered to perfectly fit their predetermined roles.
Yeah, it's not like they just get different educations. They are biologically shaped for their place.
How does that work exactly?
Yeah. Well, the Bokanovsky's process is crucial for understanding the lower rungs of this ladder. It's a method of essentially mass cloning embryos, creating dozens, sometimes hundreds, of identical individuals from a single egg.
Good grief. So armies of identical workers.
Precisely. And the teacher's guide made a key point here. The alphas and betas, the leadership castes, are not Bokanovskified.
Ah, okay. So they keep the individuality for the top tiers.
Exactly. This intentional difference really highlights how the system actively limits intellectual capacity and individuality in the majority to maintain control. It's not just about making more people, it's about creating identical people suited for specific, repetitive tasks.
Fundamentally limiting their potential for critical thought.
Absolutely. A cornerstone of the world state's control.
Right. And from the moment they're decanted, that's the word for born, right?
That decanted.
The conditioning is relentless. Everyone is programmed from childhood to love their own caste, to actually prefer their predetermined lot in life.
They even have these uniform colors so you can instantly identify someone's social standing. Gray for epsilons, khaki for deltas, and so on.
It's all about fostering this sense of belonging within your group and, I suppose, reinforcing the stability of the whole structure.
Yeah.
No envy, no ambition beyond your station.
And the ultimate goal of this intricate system, the elimination of suffering. The world state's core philosophy is that true happiness stems from a life devoid of pain, conflict, and emotional turmoil.
Which sounds,
Nice.
on the surface.
It does, but they exert an almost total control over the entire human life cycle, from conception to death, to achieve this seemingly idyllic state. What strikes you as the biggest implication of this pursuit of a pain-free existence?
Well, the way they handle reproduction is a prime example of this control, isn't it? Forget natural birth and families.
Completely gone.
It all happens in these sterile hatcheries and conditioning centers. They've got artificial wombs, assembly lines for creating babies. It's human invention applied to reproduction on an industrial scale.
Yeah, as the teacher's guide emphasizes, going way beyond just mimicking nature.
And the language they use is so detached. You mentioned this before. Unforeseen wastages.
Yeah, it sounds like something you'd say about faulty widgets on a factory line, not human beings.
Chilling.
Absolutely. And the concept of free martins, these intentionally sterilized women primarily in the lower castes.
Right. What's that about?
It's another layer of this unsettling control. It underscores how reproductive capabilities are managed and manipulated to maintain the desired social hierarchy and prevent any, well, deviation from the planned population.
So total control over who gets born and who doesn't. And to really ensure this pain-free existence, they've essentially abolished the traditional family unit.
And deep, lasting friendships, too.
Why? What's the logic there?
The logic is brutal but clear. These close emotional bonds lead to vulnerability, right?
Right.
To the potential for loss and grief when those bonds are broken. Pain.
So avoid deep connections, avoid pain.
Exactly. Instead, they're conditioned for casual promiscuity. Everyone belongs to everyone else, they constantly chant. It's about shallow connection.
No.
This constant conditioning is key. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a continuous process of reinforcing the desired behaviors and attitudes, shaping desires and aversions from infancy. And then, of course, there's soma.
Ah, yes, soma.
Yeah.
The ultimate chemical escape hatch.
Pretty much. The ultimate tool for maintaining this manufactured happiness. Got a problem. Feeling a bit down. Pop a soma.
It's the state-sanctioned escape from any unpleasantness. I remember that quote from Mustafa Mond, one of the world controllers.
Which one?
God isn't compatible with machinery and scientific medicine and universal happiness. You must make your choice. Our civilization has chosen machinery and medicine and happiness.
Yeah. That's a pretty stark trade-off laid bare, isn't it?
It really is.
What's so striking is the deliberate rejection of traditional sources of meaning and comfort, things like faith, art, even genuine human connection in favor of this scientifically engineered bliss.
Because, as Mond says, universal happiness keeps the wheels steadily turning.
Exactly. Soma is the perfect mechanism for ensuring that constant, unquestioning contentment that fuels their stable society. It represents the ultimate societal trade-off: immediate, manufactured happiness.
At the cost of genuine emotional depth and critical thought.
Which is a temptation societies continue to grapple with in different forms today, you could argue.
Absolutely. So life in the world state does have its conveniences, I suppose. They've got helicopters zipping people around.
Advanced transportation, sure.
But even leisure activities are carefully managed. Take the Solidarity Service, for example. What's that?
Yes, this is a mandatory ritual. It's designed to create this intense feeling of social unity and belonging, kind of like a communal high.
How do they do that?
The teacher's guide suggests the state employs specific psychological tactics during these services, chanting rhythmic music, soma, group sex, to achieve that collective ecstasy. It's fascinating, though, that Bernard Marx, who we'll get to, despite being a product of this world, has a profoundly negative reaction to it.
Why?
It just highlights his innate sense of alienation. The very methods designed to integrate him just make him feel more separate.
Interesting. And even something as fundamental as death is controlled and sanitized.
Oh, completely. They condition children from a young age not to fear it through these rather unsettling visits to the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying.
What happens there?
It's all bright colors, soothing music, smells, even little treats are handed out. They create this bizarrely positive atmosphere around the end of life.
While people are actually dying nearby.
Yes. The image of these young children encountering people who are dying, but being conditioned to see it as pleasant and normal, is particularly jarring.
It's a chillingly efficient way to normalize death, isn't it? To strip away the emotional weight and the process of grieving.
That are so central to human experience in other societies. It ensures that death doesn't become a source of societal disruption or emotional instability.
Okay, one more piece of this world. The feelies. What are they?
The feelies. Entertainment. But these aren't just movies. They're immersive sensory experiences. You sit in a special chair, hold onto these knobs.
And you feel what's happening on screen, like physically.
Exactly. The sensations, the emotions, everything. Lenina, who's a pretty typical product of the world state, is completely enthralled by them.
But not everyone is.
No. When John the Savage encounters them, he's utterly disgusted. He finds them crude and meaningless.
And this stark contrast immediately sets up the fundamental conflict of the novel, right?
Absolutely. John, who was raised outside the world state's control, represents a completely different understanding of reality and human connection. The sensory overload and manufactured emotions of the feelies are just repulsive to him.
Okay, so let's talk about John then. He grows up on a savage reservation in New Mexico.
Right, a place untouched by the world state's advancements. Life there is certainly more primitive in a technological sense.
The helicopters are feelies.
No, but it's also a world where things like autonomy, family structures, religious beliefs, and yes, even pain, are still a part of everyday life.
A stark contrast to the engineered sterility of London.
Completely. And John's whole concept of happiness is rooted in individuality and the full spectrum of human emotions. He understands that joy and sorrow, love and loss are all intertwined and essential parts of a meaningful life.
Which directly clashes with the world state's pursuit of this shallow, one-dimensional happiness.
Exactly.
And a massive influence on John is Shakespeare.
Huge. He uses the Bard's plays to try and make sense of his experiences, his emotions, the complexities of human relationships, things the world state has basically eliminated.
There's that profound irony, of course, when he first arrives in London and quotes Miranda's line from The Tempest.
Oh, brave new world that has such people in.
Yeah, completely unaware of the human cost behind that shiny facade. And Prospero's weary reply, "'Tis new to thee," just adds another layer of tragic foreshadowing.
It really does. And the teacher's guide helpfully lists the sheer breadth of Shakespeare that John draws upon Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, King Lear, Othello.
It really underscores how deeply these complex human dramas have shaped his understanding, highlighting the emotional and intellectual richness deliberately suppressed in the world state.
Definitely.
Interestingly, a pivotal moment for John on the reservation is when he's excluded from a traditional ceremony.
Right. It's in that isolation and rejection that he comes to his own understanding of fundamental concepts like time and death and God.
Ideas that are largely absent or, engineered out of the world state's reality.
Precisely.
Now, Bernard Marx, who you mentioned earlier, he feels like an outsider within the world state, too.
Right. He does. He's an alpha, but physically smaller than he should be, and he feels alienated. He shares that sense of not quite belonging with John.
But they handle it differently.
Fundamentally differently, yes. As the teacher's guide points out, their ways of dealing with pain and alienation diverge. Bernard seeks superficial connections, complains a lot, maybe uses soma.
Whereas John confronts difficult emotions directly.
Right. He grapples with them often through the lens of Shakespeare.
And then we have the very awkward and ultimately tragic dynamic between John and Lenina.
Oh, yeah. That's central. John's feelings for her are all tangled up in his romantic, almost chaste ideals drawn from Shakespeare.
Which, as you can imagine, are completely at odds with the world state's casual, purely physical approach to relationships. Everyone belongs to everyone else.
Exactly. So he's horrified by her forwardness, even though he's attracted to her. When he sees Lenina asleep, he even references Othello.
The strumpet's plague, yeah, which is just dripping with dramatic irony considering his deeply flawed perceptions of her and her world.
And Huxley himself famously said that John is bound by strong vows that had never been pronounced, obedient to laws that had long ceased to run.
That captures it perfectly. He's operating on a completely different moral OS.
Absolutely. After the emotionally jarring experience of the feelies with Lenina, John seeks solace and understanding in Romeo and Juliet. What does Lenina do?
Reaches for Selma.
Exactly, perfectly illustrating their fundamentally different ways of coping with discomfort and emotional complexity.
Ultimately, John's rejection of the world state's values is absolute, isn't it? He makes it crystal clear to Bernard.
He does. He declares that he would rather be unhappy than have the sort of false lying happiness that you are having here.
That statement really gets to the heart of the matter, the core conflict.
It absolutely encapsulates the clash between these two civilizations and their irreconcilable views on what constitutes a good life. Makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the price we're willing to pay for comfort and security in our own lives?
It really does. So this clash of civilizations really escalates. Bernard, who initially enjoyed a brief period of popularity after bringing John to London, that doesn't last, does it?
No, his nonconformity catches up with him. He eventually faces the consequences and is exiled to an island for his antisocial behavior.
Along with Helmholtz Watson, another nonconforming alpha.
Right. But Helmholtz, interestingly, welcomes the exile. He sees it as an opportunity for genuine intellectual freedom, away from the stifling conformity. Bernard completely breaks down, pleading, crying, begging for another chance. It shows how, despite his critiques, he's still deeply conditioned by the system.
And presiding over all this is Mustafa Mond. He gives the justification for the whole system.
He does. In his role as one of the 10 world controllers, he provides the intellectual backbone for the world state's seemingly oppressive system. He argues that the sacrifice of art, literature, scientific freedom, even personal autonomy,
High art, deep science, all gone,
is a necessary trade-off for achieving social stability and universal happiness. He isn't ignorant of what has been lost. He knows Shakespeare. He knows history. He's made a conscious choice.
for the greater good of the collective, as he sees it.
In his view, yes.
And this brings us squarely to the central debate. Happiness versus freedom. The world state has deliberately chosen engineered happiness, this kind of placid contentment achieved through control and suppression.
While John, on the other hand, passionately champions the right to experience the full spectrum of human emotions, even the unpleasant ones.
And the fundamental importance of individual freedom, even if it leads to instability and pain. Mond famously distills John's argument down to,
The right to be unhappy. A profound concept.
it is. The role of God and religion is also a key fault line here.
Absolutely. The world state has actively dismissed God and religious belief as incompatible with their scientific, rationalized society. Mond explicitly says it's not needed when you have youth and prosperity.
But John, raised in a more traditional setting, has a natural inclination towards faith, especially in moments of solitude or when contemplating mortality.
Right, and Mond's response is telling. They've deliberately conditioned people against that very need for solitude and introspection. Constant distraction, group activities.
So you never have the quiet moment to even consider God.
That seems to be the idea. Keep people busy, keep them consuming, keep them superficially happy.
John goes even further in his defiance, arguing for the intrinsic value of difficulty and pain.
Yeah, he believes that experiencing the full range of human existence, including suffering and struggle, is what gives life depth and purpose. This is the polar opposite of the world state's relentless pursuit of comfort.
Avoidance of anything remotely unpleasant.
Exactly. His powerful outburst near the end really sums it up.
Remind me.
But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin.
Wow. That lays it all out there. He wants the whole messy package.
He does. And Mond also lays bare the world state's carefully managed approach to scientific inquiry.
Right, they limit science. Why?
He argues that unrestricted scientific exploration can be a dangerous force. It has the potential to destabilize the social order by uncovering truths that might challenge their carefully constructed reality.
So science is only pursued if it serves stability. Anything potentially disruptive is forbidden.
Precisely. Truth is sacrificed for happiness and stability.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit now and consider Aldous Huxley's own perspectives on all of this. That 1958 interview with Mike Wallace sounds really insightful.
It really is. Hearing him reflect on the themes of his novel decades later is fascinating. He believed that the threats to individual freedom weren't necessarily coming from overtly malicious dictators.
Not like a Big Brother figure.
Not necessarily, but rather from impersonal, almost systemic forces at play in society.
Like what?
He specifically pointed to overpopulation, particularly in developing nations. He worried it could pressure central governments to exert more control over resources and individual lives, potentially paving the way for totalitarian-style rule.
More people, more need for control. Makes sense.
He even noted the paradoxical role that the Catholic Church's opposition to birth control could play in exacerbating these pressures in certain regions.
Huh. Interesting point. What else?
He also raised concerns about what he called over-organization. As our technology becomes more sophisticated, the structures needed to manage it businesses, governments become increasingly complex and hierarchical.
Right, bureaucracies get bigger.
And in that kind of environment, Huxley worried that individuals would inevitably become smaller and smaller cogs in a larger machine, leading to a gradual erosion of personal autonomy. You become a subordinate, not an individual.
Yeah, I can see that.
And perhaps most presciently, Huxley was deeply concerned about the potential for technology to be used for mass persuasion and control.
Propaganda.
Yes, but evolving. He referenced Hitler's very effective use of radio propaganda and warned that future technologies, far more sophisticated, could bypass rational thought entirely. by appealing directly to our subconscious desires and emotions. He feared methods that could effectively lead people to actually love their slavery without even realizing it.
That sounds eerily familiar to some of the debates we have today about social media algorithms and targeted advertising, doesn't it?
It really, really does. He even worried that a Brave New World-like scenario could emerge in seemingly democratic societies.
Not through violence.
Through more insidious means, like constant distraction. He specifically mentioned excessive television viewing back then.
Which we could update to smartphones and streaming now.
Easily. Also, the use of drugs and these sophisticated forms of propaganda that bypass our critical thinking, he felt it was absolutely crucial to be aware of these potential dangers.
To think proactively about safeguarding our freedoms.
Exactly. His observations on political campaigns are also remarkably relevant today.
Oh, yeah. What did he say?
He noted the increasing emphasis on a candidate's image and personality, carefully manufactured by advertising experts, over their actual political platforms and principles. He described candidates being merchandised as though they were soap or toothpaste.
Wow, that was in 1958. Still feels current.
Doesn't it? He even flagged the potential danger of subliminal projection as a future tool for influencing voters below the level of conscious awareness, influencing choice without reason.
Scary stuff. And advertising in general was a major concern for him.
Huge concern. While acknowledging its role in the economy, he worried deeply about its inherent tendency to bypass rational thought and tap into our unconscious desires.
Undermining informed democratic choice.
Precisely. He drew a disturbing parallel between children mindlessly singing advertising jingles and the kind of unquestioning indoctrination seen in totalitarian regimes.
He made that chilling comparison.
What was it?
Between European children being considered cannon fire and American children becoming television and radio fodder, highlighting the pervasive influence of media shaping minds from a young age.
And he saw a difference between Soviet-style brainwashing and Western advertising.
He did. He differentiated between the more brutal individual brainwashing techniques used then in Russia and China and the more widespread, less direct shotgun method of advertising and propaganda prevalent in the U.S., hitting everyone subtly.
So given all these worries, what did Huxley believe we could do? How could we protect ourselves?
Well, he stressed the importance of education, but a specific kind of education, one that fosters critical thinking, the cultivation of strong individual values that can stand against groupthink.
Resisting the pressure to conform. Yes, and the need to teach people how to recognize manipulative rhetoric and, as he put it, verbal booby traps. Media literacy, basically.
Before we called it that.
Right. He also advocated for decentralization of power to give citizens a greater sense of direct agency and control over their lives rather than feeling lost in huge systems.
And ultimately, he argued that freedom wasn't just some abstract ideal.
No, it was a vital necessity for a truly productive and creative society and for the full flourishing of individual potential. You need freedom for progress, for art, for the human spirit.
Okay. Now, as we start to wrap things up, let's revisit the novel itself and its enduring legacy. It's fascinating to remember that Brave New World wasn't conceived in a vacuum, right?
Not at all. It was directly inspired by and intended as a kind of satirical response to H.G. Wells's more optimistic utopian visions of the future. Huxley wanted to provide a frightening negative utopia.
A warning, not a blueprint.
Definitely a warning. And the historical context of the Great Depression is also really important to consider. Well, the widespread economic hardship and social instability of that era likely contributed to Huxley's focus on stability as a primary societal need, perhaps explaining why his characters would trade so much for it.
Even if it came at the cost of individual liberties.
Exactly.
And, as we've touched on before, it's almost impossible to discuss Brave New World without also considering George Orwell's 1984.
They're often paired together. While both depict dystopian futures, they offer contrasting visions of how control might be achieved Brave New World through pleasure and conformity.
Soma and conditioning.
And 1984 through pain, fear, and surveillance.
Big Brother. They serve as these powerful, almost diametrically opposed warnings.
Two potential paths we might want to avoid, interestingly, despite his own lifelong complex interest in eugenics.
Which is a whole other topic.
Indeed. Huxley's primary concern in Brave New World seems to have been less about biotechnology itself and more about the broader dangers of totalitarianism and the subtle erosion of individual freedom through various means technological, psychological manipulation.
The tech serves the control. It's not the main point itself.
That seems to be the emphasis.
The teacher's guide we looked at really highlights some of the timeless questions the book provokes, doesn't it?
It does. suggesting essay and debate topics like whether a rigid social hierarchy could ever be justified for the sake of societal stability,
A tough question.
or the fundamental tension between the needs of the individual and the needs of the community. A debate that continues to rage today, in discussions around things like data privacy, government surveillance, public health mandates.
The balance is always shifting.
Always. And it was interesting to see in that Reddit discussion how modern readers are still grappling with the book's themes.
What were they saying?
Drawing parallels between Huxley's vision and contemporary issues like the hypersexualization of children in media or the increasing normalization of escapism through various forms of entertainment and technology.
So seeing reflections of the world state now.
Some were, yes, while some commenters dismissed the book, called it boring and stupid, I think.
Always happens.
Others found its warnings about the control of information and the erosion of individuality chillingly relevant to our current times. The idea of being happy in chains.
It's also worth noting, as that PubMed article pointed out, that Brave New World gets referenced a lot in bioethics discussions.
Especially around gene editing, like CRISPR. It's used as a kind of cautionary thought experiment about potential unintended consequences. The designer baby scenario.
But there's a complication there.
Well, as the article also noted, some bioethicists find its historical connection to eugenics problematic when trying to argue against illiberal uses of CRISPR technology. They worry it muddies the waters and suggest maybe drawing on a wider range of fictional narratives.
Interesting nuance.
And finally, it's important to remember the novel's own history of controversy. Brave New World has faced numerous bans and challenges over the years.
Because of the sex, the drugs, the challenging of norms.
All of the above. Its exploration of these complex and sometimes unsettling themes has often put it in the crosshairs.
So, as we conclude this deep dive into Brave New World, it really comes back to that central tension that Huxley so powerfully explored, doesn't it?
It really does. The delicate balance, or perhaps the inherent conflict, between societal stability and individual freedom.
And the vastly different paths that humanity can take in the pursuit of happiness. Pleasure versus meaning, perhaps.
That's a good way to put it. So, what resonates most with you, the listener, as you reflect on Huxley's 1932 vision? Which aspects feel most acutely relevant in our world today?
Yeah, are we, perhaps subtly and incrementally, drifting towards some version of the world state's model with its emphasis on comfort and distraction?
Or are we actively cherishing and defending the messy, complex beauty of individual experience and freedom with all the pain and difficulty that sometimes entails?
For those of you whose interest has been piqued, I strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of Brave New World itself. It's a surprisingly quick and definitely thought-provoking read.
You might also find Huxley's later essay, Brave New World Revisited, equally illuminating. He looks back on his predictions decades later.
And perhaps consider engaging in some discussions online with friends around the ethical implications of the rapidly advancing technologies that are increasingly shaping our society and even our very nature.
And perhaps the most crucial question to leave you contemplating is this. In a world of relentless technological advancement and ever-increasing societal pressures for conformity, what does it truly mean to be happy?
And what does it truly mean to be free?